Thank you for joining us in the Copy Room, where you get to listen in on thoughtful, vulnerable, and honest conversations among educators who are as fiercely devoted to this profession as you are. My aim is to serve you well, nourishing your teacher's soul so that you can move through your week with just a bit more to offer our kids than you had before you listened. You're working so hard to take care of our kids. My intention for this podcast, ultimately, is to take care of you. I want to thank Dirt Path Publishing, a small independent publishing house dedicated to publishing works for social good, for continuing to support the production of this podcast. With editing and coaching services for writers, these folks know how to have the hard conversations in service to your best work, and they know how to do it with love. Dirt Path Publishing is also proud to announce the release of my new book, Nothing's Missing, A Year of Reckoning, Release, and Remembering Who I Am, written for anyone struggling to release the burdens of perfectionism and the tyranny of shoulds. For more information, go to NicoleLuciani.com. In the meantime, and always, welcome to the Copy Room. Julie and I met when we were in 8th grade at our high school, which at that time included 8th graders. We ran in different circles and had different interests, but we came together in the 11th grade under the tutelage of Mike Matthews, who you met in episode 3. We were both inspired and prepared for college in this and his AP government class the following year. Julie went to Cal, I went to St. Mary's, and then, several years later, we met back again at the San Lorenzo High School cafeteria, where teachers new to the district were gathered for our first day orientation. Although I started teaching at San Lorenzo, I left for 3 years to teach somewhere else in the Bay Area before returning. The same year, Julie decided to move back to San Lorenzo to continue her teaching career, which had also started some years before. We had come back home, in many ways, to pay it forward. Some years later, Julie went on to become an assistant principal and then a principal at another Bay Area school, and Briana joined our staff. I didn't remember her as a young person, but I was told in no uncertain terms, she's a real San Lorenzo kid, just like you. Like me, she told anyone who would listen that's exactly who she was. Loyalty to our school, a place that propelled us forward in ways that we could not have imagined, was one of many things Briana and I had in common. When it came time to record this season, I knew I wanted to ask Briana to be a guest, with one of the teachers who had inspired her to be a teacher. What a gift to me to find out that Briana's first choice was my old friend Julie. The episode was a bit like Old Home Week, and also a time for me to learn more about my pals. This is one of the many reasons why I love this podcast so much. People I love and respect, sharing themselves vulnerably and authentically in service to creating a place of rest for our teacher souls to be seen and understood. This is the best thing I've ever done. Julie and Briana belong to one another, then and now, just as they do to me and you to all of us, because we always belong to one another. If for no other reason, then we know for sure that there's no such thing as other people's children. I don't know if you've had a chance to listen to some of the other episodes, but it's just been such a gift to me to be able to have these conversations with people I care about and respect. And if nothing else, it's giving me the opportunity to make sure that people know I love and respect them, because I'm not going to have anybody on here who I don't believe serves for the similar reasons that I serve, and I think you both are amazing, and I'm so grateful that you're here. So welcome to Julie and Briana. A little backstory. Julie and I went to high school together. At the beginning of season 2, the listeners met Mike Matthews because he was my teacher who I follow in the footsteps of, and I know, Julie, you probably feel the same.
Very much so.
And so Julie and I were a part of the very first AP classes at San Lorenzo High School. I think you probably had a different entrance into that program, Julie. I mean, basically, like literally, Mike pulled me from my backpack into the room to sit me down and fill out that application. And I would guess, just in maybe this is perception, but I would guess that this was something that you were longing for, was a class for rigor. Is
Yes,
that right? Yeah.
definitely. As soon as I found out, I'm like, count me in.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah. And then we went our separate ways, and somehow we ended up back at San Lorenzo at the same time. For a few years, we crossed over, and in that mix, little Brianna came through San Lorenzo High School, and then now she's at San Lorenzo High School teaching. So this is such a you that I don't know what it's called, but that story where you throw the rock in the pond and the ripples echo out. I feel like we're having a little bit of that moment right now.
For
It's so
sure.
beautiful. As I said before we started recording, I have a million questions. I'm going to try to stay focused and and have us just start with a little backstory. And Julie, let's start with you. Thinking back to your education, your growing up, we grew up in similar neighborhoods, but we had a different familial experience, certainly, and culturally different experience. And so I always wonder what I didn't know about the people I went to high school with, and what's the backstory there? What was your experience in school? What made you want to be a teacher? Take us back through that a little bit.
sure. So I am very blessed to be the daughter of Peruvian immigrants. My parents, my dad came here as a teenager and went to high school here, but my mom came over to marry my father. And before that, she had worked in retail, but had always aspired to be a teacher. So when she
Mm,
was able to be a stay-at-home mom, which was when I was small, very small,
mhm,
she taught me how to read and write. So because she was wanted to be a
mm,
teacher, and so I knew how to do
mhm,
all that when I went
mhm,
into a dual immersion kindergarten in South Hayward. My parents didn't
mm,
want to stay in South Hayward because that neighborhood evolved,
mhm,
and so we moved to San Lorenzo.
mhm,
And it was a completely different experience for me. In the dual immersion, I felt very empowered. I felt very loved by my kindergarten teacher because I came in with skills. She would have me work with my peers. And so it just
mm,
became it was this wonderful place for me. And then we moved to San
mhm,
Lorenzo, where I am probably one of very few Latinx kids. And to boot, I'm also indigenous in appearance. So people didn't know what to make of me because I wasn't Mexican and I didn't look
mhm,
Mexican. And so people were forever trying to figure out what I was. And so it made
mhm,
it really difficult, but I have always loved school. For me, learning has always been a place like a safe haven. I had a
mhm,
really good like family structure and support with the immediate family, but we
mhm,
were also the way station. So my home was often, a place that was the first landing spot for folks coming in from Peru, because as cousins and
mm,
aunts and different relatives came to this country, either legally or illegally, my family
mhm,
was a place to stop. And so there was a lot of
mhm,
chaos and upheaval at all times. So school was
mhm,
the safe haven, right? And school was
mhm,
where I excelled, and school was where I had support. I was
mhm,
really lucky at Lorenzo Manor, which was my elementary school, to have a woman of color as our reading specialist. And I look
mm,
at her, her name was Silver White, and she was just phenomenal. She really pushed us. She gave us that rigor, and she always, treated all of us and just with dignity and respect. And I
mm.
remember running into her many years later when we used to go to the same gym, and she hadn't changed at all. And she was just like, "Oh, I always
Um,
knew you were going to be a teacher. I'm so proud." And so
oh, that's
I
lovely.
think of her all the time and how wonderful she was. Um,
Mhm,
and then we obviously transitioned over to San Lorenzo High, and
mhm.
as you know, Nicole, we had so many amazing teachers that for me it
Yeah.
was a no-brainer that I would end up following in their footsteps.
Mhm, mhm. Thank you. So, Brianna, again, same
Yeah.
neighborhoods as us, coming through. Tell us a little bit about your growing up and how school fit in.
So growing up, one of the biggest thing that's has always kind of influenced me and who I am is we were always very poor.
Mhm,
So I kind of like grew up, I've done the welfare, the food stamps, like all of that. And so it was something I was always very, very aware of. I grew up in Hayward, originally, and then we moved to technically we never even moved to San Lorenzo. We were in unincorporated Hayward in the San Lorenzo School District, and I actually moved into the San Lorenzo schools my 7th grade year, even though I'd been living there for like 3 years, but I finished out at my elementary school in Hayward. I went to Lorenzo Manor as a 7th grader for 1 year, and then I went to San Lorenzo High School as an 8th grader. I was the last 8th grade class. So I was in the last 8th grade class at San Lorenzo. So I was the youngest 2 years in a row as an 8th grader and then a freshman. Definitely a unique experience. I love to tell my students all the time there, because they're like, "Oh, what middle school did you go to?" I'm like, "I didn't go to middle school. I went from elementary school to high school." So I'm like, I never experienced middle school, which I'm very thankful for. And I mean, and school was always just like everything to me. I don't even know where, like, education wasn't really pushed in my family. Like, it was like, you know, they liked that I had good grades, but it wasn't anything that was ever like super celebrated or you have to get good grades. I imagine I learned about the valedictorian from TV. It's the only thing I can figure. But at some point, I decided I was going to be valedictorian. On my, like I said, it has to have come from TV. Like, it has to have. And I was just very focused in school, like, to an unhealthy degree, possibly. Julie can probably attest to this, that I had crazy anxiety. Like, school was never hard. It was never an issue of, like, straight A's came easily to me until senior year, when physics almost killed my GPA. And I still maintain, I'm sure that's the only A I didn't earn. I think Dave Fryer took pity on me and didn't want to be responsible for what would happen to me if I ended up with a B in that class. And I've asked him, and he said, "I don't think I did that." I'm like, "I think you did." You know, I ended up straight A's. I did not end up getting valedictorian, because eventually I actually ended up prioritizing journalism over that. And I had to make a decision. I knew, like, my best friend was in the running, and then another girl was in the running. And I didn't take as many AP classes as them because I took newspaper instead. I still disagree with the way that our school handled that. But yeah, so ultimately I ended up graduating 3rd in the class behind my best friend and this other girl.
Which is so amazing. I can't even, like, oh. Julie, were you on the newspaper too, or were you in yearbook? I can't remember.
I was the yearbook copy editor.
You were I was in journalism, and I remember, like, was Julie there? No. So, it's interesting how school brings kids. I think probably all of us have a similar experience where we were looking for somewhere to belong. We were looking where things were stable, where we were safe, where we could maybe dream bigger dreams. Although, Julie, it sounds like your mom was extraordinary. Brianna, I had a similar experience where, like, as long as you get above a C, it's fine.
Yeah.
And, college, I was the first to college,
Me too.
and there was never a conversation around, like, you must get good grades and work hard, And maybe some of that comes with the privilege of not, I'm 3rd generation immigrant, and I think something happens by the time you get to 3rd generation where there's a privilege that exists, that the hustle is not the same. Maybe, I'm not sure. But it's an interesting question about why school is so important to kids like us. So, Julie, you were Brianna's English teacher,
Yes.
I assume somewhere along the way. So tell me about your relationship as teacher and student, and maybe some things you learned from one another. Let's just start with that and see where it goes.
Sure. So I met Brianna the summer before she became a freshman at San Lorenzo High. She was a freshman in the summer program of Upward Bound, where I was an English teacher. So I was doing a side gig on the weekends and in the summers, teaching English and creative writing at Upward Bound. And she stood out to me immediately. I just feel like we probably clicked from day one. I mean, she was articulate, she was outspoken, she was super enthusiastic about everything. Like, she was the kid, like, you were a teacher for a long time, Nicole, and you know that there's those times when you're just like, am I reaching anyone? Does anybody get me?
Yes.
Does anybody understand any of the things that I'm trying to say? And with Brianna, she was that go-to student. Like, she was the one that was like, she was on. She was on it, whether it was talking about reading or doing a creative writing exercise. She was with me 100% of the time, or at least that was my perception, Briana. So
definitely
she stood out to me immediately, and we bonded immediately. So even though I was still teaching in Hayward Unified and then did a year in San Francisco, we kept in touch because of Upward Bound. And I remember you had a project, I want to say, Briana, maybe sophomore year, a career project.
Yeah, career project.
And
for
you
career
interviewed
decisions.
me for it because you were looking at, being a teacher. And so you interviewed me for your project. And so we just kind of kept that connection. And there was this running joke that we had with each other about when was I going to get over to San Lorenzo High and teach there. And I was always like, no, I'm committed elsewhere. And then lo and behold, I end up taking the position as the AP English teacher at San Lorenzo High. And so I was there during the senior year that Briana was describing as their advanced placement literature teacher, which I had always said for me as an English teacher, that always felt to me like that's the apex, right? Like that's the apex section as an English teacher. But for me, it wasn't so much about the title. It was really about the content. And that's absolutely one of my favorite classes to teach. And I did a lot of things that I wanted, that I dreamt of doing, that things that professors had done when I was an English major that I was able to do with my students. So there was a lot of freedom there. I think that's part of what it was. It was just that freedom to select the content and to select the work that we were doing. And it was such a great experience. We did all these field trips to see plays, outside of the area. And it was we had a really strong class bond.
Oh yeah.
Maybe too strong, because I know I was probably involved in the politics of the valedictorian selection. Briana can probably attest to the fact that there were some ruffled feathers there because there was the perception that Miss Calderon had taken sides or Miss Calderon was weighing in. But it was a great experience. And Briana, our relationship never really stopped. And we stayed friends. She went off to college and we remained friends over the years. And so it was kind of, it made total sense to me that when she was getting her teaching credential, that she would somehow end up being one of my mentees. And so I was very fortunate to serve as one of her mentor teachers. She came, at that point I was already at Arroyo.
Okay.
After I'd had my daughter, I stepped away from administration and back into the classroom. And so she came over and she joined me as one of my student teachers. And she was phenomenal. I knew she would be, but I remember thinking, okay, now I can just retire because Briana can come and take my classes and be a million times better than I ever was. And so it was really gratifying to see her and to help her in her formation. She already had it. She'd been a substitute teacher for years. I want to say you probably even subbed for me, Briana, prior to being my student teacher. So it was so wonderful. And I think, I've always admired your resilience, Briana. You're so tenacious. And so even when I struggle, I think of just, what you've done and how you've lived your dream of you told me I think at 14, you told me, I'm going to have your job at San Lorenzo High someday. And so I think of that a lot.
God, that's beautiful. Isn't there something too, Julie, about seeing someone who you served go on to serve others in a way that's even better than you could have done? It's like the most glorious gift, Briana, that you've given Julie in that way. And I know you have a lot of strong feelings about the gifts that Julie gave to you.
So to fill in some of the gaps, it's insane how much our lives are intertwined in all of this. So she talked about us meeting at Upward Bound, and I just completely fell in love with her. I was like, this is the best teacher ever. She encouraged me in my writing. And I think what I loved is not all English teachers are necessarily as creative writing minded. I always had amazing English teachers, but Julie definitely has that creative side. And I actually ended up majoring in creative writing in college. So I've always loved that side of things, and I loved getting that from her. And I think that's what initially bonded us. She helped me a lot with my writing. And then, I was always bugging her. I'm like, okay, you need to come teach at San Lorenzo now. That's where you belong. Because I knew that she went there too. I was like, you have to come back home. So I was so excited when she came back for my senior year. And it was very good for me to have her there. Because like I said, I really struggled that year. My depression was very bad that year. Because I always had these unrealistic expectations for myself that nobody else had. Nobody expected me I never had pressure from other people. It was always all coming from myself. And Julie helped me a lot through that. Like it's okay not to be perfect. And at the same time, she still pushed me to be better. And I actually, when I think of myself as a teacher, the way I handle kind of like the superstar students is because of the way she handled me. She could have let me coast. I was a very good English student. Obviously, it's why I went into English. And she totally could have let me coast, but she never did. She always pushed me. And she knew that like my goal was I needed that 9. I needed that 9 on an essay. And I was getting so frustrated I wasn't getting it. And she just kept giving me feedback and telling me, you know, you need to work on this. And I was the first person in the class to get a 9. My best friend was second. And so like I think about that all the time, how you know, you always have those superstar students in your class that they turn in an essay and you know it's an A. And it'd be really easy to just give them the A and move on. But I always try to find something, even if it's objectively a perfect essay. I try to find something and look, this is an A. You really don't need to change anything about it. But if you want to push yourself to be a better writer, you can try doing this. And so I always try to give some sort of feedback, but I let them know, like, I'm giving you this to help you be better. But you don't have to do it, right? It's like, if you're like, I'm good, I'm cool with how I am, you don't have to do it, but I'm just giving you information that can make you a better writer. So I've learned how to teach students like me from Julie more than anyone. A lot of my other teachers as well, but Julie especially. And then let's see. So yeah, I went to college. We stayed in touch. She actually gave me a place to live for a little bit. Wow. I have a very rough relationship with my mom and sister, and I came home and I was like, yeah, I really liked not being here for 4 years, and I'd like to not be here again. But I couldn't afford to get a place on my own straight out of college. So Julie, I lived with her for almost a year, I want to say. And I was, I paid her a disgustingly low amount of rent, and was able to save up money, so I was able to move out on my own. And that was such a fun time. It was so fun living with her. And that's like definitely when we were always friends, but that like really cemented like, okay, she's not just my teacher, she's not just my mentor, like she is my friend. And then she actually gave me my first real teaching job, actually. I was subbing in the San Lorenzo district, and one of the teachers was moving on to the district office, and so they needed a long-term sub, and Julie was the one who recommended me for the job. So I want to say probably 2 years after I'd graduated from college. I'd been subbing for like a year. And then this job opened up and she recommended me for it and I got hired. And so, yeah, I ended up actually becoming, it was a part-time position for the first semester. And then they were like, okay, next semester we actually need full-time. Are you willing to do that? And I was like, absolutely. And so I ended up doing second semester full-time while I was still working full-time at a restaurant. So that was kind of like, there's been several moments in my life where I was like, this is what I want to do. But during that job is when I really realized it, because I went to take a day off from my restaurant for my birthday in April. And I realized that that was going to be my first day off since the beginning of the year. Wow. I had been working at least one of my jobs every day for 4 months. Yes, and I didn't realize it until that moment because I was so happy.
Oh my God.
I loved teaching so much. I was not good. Like, I mean, I was good in some sense, but I look back now and I was like, wow, I had like no boundaries with, because I was like 24 years old teaching, like, you know, and so I was like, I did not have any boundaries with my students that I really should have had, but it was just so fun and so wonderful. And like, I was like, I can't believe I've been working nonstop and I like didn't even realize it because it was just so, I could not do that now, by the way. No. Like this is, 24-year-old me was able to handle that, but it was just, and that's when I realized I'm like, okay, like this is definitely what I want to do. Like I need to to stop fooling around. I need to get myself into grad school, get my teaching credential, because I always knew I wanted my master's. So I kind of stopped fooling around and got that done. And Julie was someone who pushed me, and then Carlos Cabana. Every time, because the next year I was subbing again. Every time he saw me, so have you gone? Like, what's going on with school? Are you going back to school?
Yeah.
Like, when are you going to stop subbing and actually do this for real? I was like, I know.
I know. We're going to meet Carlos next
Yay.
season. He's just an extraordinary human. You know, it's funny because we've known each other a long time, and there's a lot we have in common. I started as a long-term sub. I was 21, mind you. Jerry Glenn hired me. What the hell? I don't know.
Mr. Glenn.
And Mr. Glenn. And I was working a restaurant job at night at the same time. I was not as joyful as you. I was dragging. But I think it's an interesting thing that in our families, at least in mine, academics wasn't prized, but your work ethic was, right? Get out, make your money, get your hustle on, get through your business. And there's something about that that I think is important. And I wonder, and maybe that's part of what makes San Lorenzo kids special, is that, I don't know, I think there's a million reasons San Lorenzo kids are special. But there's something about just, and I think you mentioned Carlos, the ethic of care that the teachers had. It was like, we work at this. This isn't like natural, I'm going to wait for the feeling to come, right? We're going to work because we have an ethic of care. We're going to work to love our kids, even the ones that like we wish were absent, right?
You're just always here, aren't you?
Always, God. That's great. Okay, so thinking back just to your individual careers, I wonder if there's a moment, because I think these kids, like these ones that are never absent, that are so hard, that there are teachers, right? They're there to teach us something that we need to learn. And I remember I was very conflict averse when I started teaching. And of course, I got every kid who wanted to be in a fight because I had to learn how to deal with that. And so I wonder if you look back and you think about, was there a family member or a student or maybe both who really gave you pause and you look back and appreciate them even though they were hard because they taught you something important? Briana, let's start with you.
So my story's a little bit of a downer, but it was still a really valuable lesson for me to learn. Because so probably unlike every teacher currently teaching in existence, last year was not my hardest year of teaching. This year is not my hardest year of teaching. The year prior to the pandemic was my hardest year of teaching. And I literally like came home one day and started like just sitting there and brainstorming, what else can I do with my life? Because I can't teach anymore. It was a really hard year. Julie knows a little bit about it. I talked to her a little bit about it. I had just kind of a powder keg class of just, I literally had 3 fights break out in my classroom that year. And anybody who knows me knows that like classroom management, never been an issue for me. It's one of the things that both Julie and Vandana Macher, who is my other mentor teacher when I was student teaching, was like, you have classroom management down. Like it's and it's just never been a thing. And I literally had like fights breaking out. I'm like, there's nothing I can do to stop this. Like I cannot de-escalate these children. And so it was a very tough year. I could not bond with them. Like I tried so hard to like create relationships with these students, and it like what I could do it like on an individual level a little bit, but it's like when they were all it was a hard class. And I had one student in particular that I actually started making some leeway with. His counselor, he had given his counselor permission for her to tell me a little bit about his background. And I realized that he and I had a lot in common. He and I grew up in very similar life situations. He was an African-American male and I was a white woman, and I'm sure he felt like, oh, we have nothing in common. And then one day I just kind of sat down down with him. I'm like, look, your counselor kind of told me this. I'm like, I just want to tell you a little bit about how I grew up. And I told him some stories, and we started to kind of bond. He like started cutting his class the period I had prep and like coming to hang out with me. And I'm like, okay. I'm like, wow. I can't harbor fugitives. You need to go back to class. Yeah. But it was, we really started creating a bond and things were better. I'm like, oh, this is wonderful. And then one day we had a lockdown. And my principal, I don't know what happened, if she was out of breath or what, but she sounded very scared on the announcement with the lockdown. And then I had a child in my class. They started having a panic attack. So I took them into my office and was like trying to calm them down. And they were just like very anxious and all of this. And then this other student who I'd been working with was being a jackass, just like making jokes and like, the school's going to get shut up, blah, 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 blah. And I was like, you need to stop. I'm like, there are people in this room who are scared and you cannot act like this. And he just lost it on me. Like, you dumb bitch, blah, blah, blah. Why do you always have something to say? And I was just like, I had to make a choice in that moment. We'd already gotten an email saying that there was no danger anymore, but we were still on lockdown. I literally opened the door, called a security guard, and kicked this student out of my class during a lockdown. And I was like, but I had to make a choice. Like, I like this other student, and I felt awful. I was like, I kicked a student out during a lockdown. Like, what is wrong with me? And I felt terrible. I wanted to fix things. And then his parent asked for him to be moved out of my class. And normally I would have fought it, especially because I'd made so much progress with him. Normally I would have fought it, but I was like, you know what? Maybe I'm not the one. Maybe I'm not the one who can reach this kid. Maybe this isn't going to be me. And that's okay. I still cared about him. I checked in on him. I, would talk to his other teacher, like, how's he doing? But I was like, I just can't be the one. Like, I made a decision. I stand by the decision, even though I felt bad about it. And it kind of just broke. I was like, I'm not going to be able to repair this. And I need to just let it go and hope he does well. Two things helped me kind of come to terms with it, that the decision I made was okay. One was talking to my other colleagues, and they were like, you had to do what you had to do. And the other was this student. They came back to me like the next year, and they were like, I just wanted to thank you for helping me like during that time. They'd had a nightmare the night before about a school shooting. And so like, I mean, and they were just like, you were so caring to me, and you like just made me feel so safe. And I was like, okay, I'm like, I made the right decision. I did what I had to do. And it basically, it taught me that while I want to help every single student, there are going to be times that I can't. And it doesn't make me a bad person. It doesn't make me a bad teacher. It's okay. Like, I try my very best for as long as I can, and then I just can't anymore. And that's okay.
That's really, really powerful. And his blowing up like that was his own pain. Yeah. Right? You know that has nothing to do with you. And that's your ability to not personalize that is so healthy. And also, I think, a sign of extraordinary love for him, in that you held a boundary that needed to be held, not only for you and for that other child, but for this boy. He needed that boundary. And the hope is down the road that serves him in some way, even though it was so difficult for you. That's a really powerful lesson. Julie, where are you with this whole thing? Where have you kind of jumped in somewhere and felt totally jarred, but left really having an important lesson?
So I made the transition from teacher, which I loved to do, into administration, at the kind of the encouragement of my mentors. And there are times when I second guess it, and I wonder, like, did I make the right choice? Are there any openings at San Lorenzo High? I asked Briana last week. And I think, I can relate to really struggling with some students. Like, there have been over the years as a teacher, there were students I just could never gel with. I remember when I went the teacher in Hayward, which, in a lot of ways was a dream job in and of its own right. There was one student in particular. Yeah, we were both Latinx. Yes, we had similar family backgrounds, and yet we never clicked ever. Like, in his journal, he would write about she's so arrogant and I can't stand her. And, Miss Calderon
Wow.
thinks she knows it all. And I remember thinking, what am I doing wrong that I'm not reaching this kid? Like, we're reading all this content and we're doing all these activities that you would think would help us connect. And we're supposed
Yeah.
to build community. And with him, he always held me at arm's length. And, then you read these journal entries and they're about you and how awful you are. And at that time, I was super young. I would have been like, what, 24, 25 at that time. And
Oh
at
gosh,
that
that's
point in time, I don't think I couldn't help but personalize it. And then
sure.
unfortunately, then I would just be really cold to him. And so then it would be,
Mm,
and she's doesn't even try to reach out to me. So that happened over the years. As an English teacher, there was a valedictorian that is after you, Brianna, that same thing. I couldn't click with him. He was in my AP class and it was the same kind of feedback. And I remember thinking, okay, I don't consider myself to be this awful, but yet I keep getting this feedback, particularly from males, that I'm a
mm,
know-it-all and that I have favorites. And, that kind of
mm,
always haunted me. So that when I became a
mm,
principal and then ended up going in a completely different direction away from the superstar students and the AP kids all the way over to alternative education where now I'm a continuation high school principal. I think
mhm,
that feedback actually stayed with me and that I've always made that effort to be
mhm,
humble and
mhm,
to be open to constructive criticism from students and to really try to love the kids that are trying to be unlovable. So that really what you said, Nicole, about that student's pain, that's what it is,
mhm,
right? These young men
mhm,
were probably responding maybe to how they saw maybe the women in their lives treated, or maybe their
mhm,
relationship with their mothers, or women
mhm,
in their lives. Who knows? It's hard to say because I didn't have that kind of relationship with these boys. But I think that feedback that they gave me stayed with me, right? Because I
mhm,
couldn't
mhm,
approach being an alt ed principal in the same way that I used to approach being a creative writing teacher or an English teacher
mhm,
or an AP teacher. It's just, or even in a comprehensive high school AP, it's a
mhm,
completely different world, especially with alt ed kids who often feel very disengaged, disempowered, disillusioned, demoralized
mhm,
by education as a whole.
mhm,
This is really a place where they need some serious healing
mm,
around,
mhm,
the academic world. And so much of school has been traumatic for them. So
mm,
it is my job to kind of re-engage, right, and reconnect and
mhm,
kind of give them a completely different experience where that ethic of care is in place, because I think they would
mhm,
say and their parents would say that hasn't been the case. And that's often what I hear
mhm,
from families is, these schools are giving us the runaround, this district is horrible, this is our
mhm,
last resort. And so
mhm,
then kind of helping those families and those students understand, that this is a place, this is going to be a safe place. And
mhm,
yes, maybe academics isn't going to be your safe haven like it was for me, but at the
mhm,
very least, we're going to get through it so that you can get on to the rest of your life. So yeah, some of
mhm,
that harsh feedback that I got from those students that I did personalize, it stayed with me, and I
mhm,
feel like it really helped me become a better educator and ultimately a better
mhm.
principal.
Well, it's fascinating because you did personalize it, but in a way that served you to be able to serve others. You didn't personalize it and then blame them, right? You held it for maybe a little too long on your heart. And I don't know too if some of that was kind of the reflection of some unhealed stuff. To me, we all become teachers for a variety of reasons, but we're all invited to heal some wounds that we're carrying. And I've got this whole kind of philosophy about the spiritual aspect of teaching, but I would imagine you probably faced that growing up. Who do you think you are? You think you know more than others, like all of that. I would imagine that that was part of your growing up. And to be back as a teacher serving kids and to hear it again, it's like that probably just got your soft spot so intensely.
No, that's really interesting because I talk about that with my family members all the time, because that's
Hmm.
definitely like, while my parents were very supportive, my extended family to this day is very like, who is this alien that lives among us? Right?
Yeah,
They
yeah,
so
right,
don't get me, right? They
right.
think it's, oh, that's cool that she's a teacher, and she was a teacher, now she's a principal. But
Yeah,
now I'm even more of an alien, and they're like, how did she get
yes,
dropped
yes.
into this family? Where did she come from?
Right. Right.
So
And you went to Cal, right?
I
You
did.
went to Cal?
Yes.
I mean, that's an extraordinary thing. I remember extended family of mine like calling me college girl in like a snide tone, right?
Yes.
And here you are back serving kids and thinking, because we all try to teach our kids like they're us at first, don't you think?
Yeah.
In your early years, like, oh, I just want to do creative projects all day, every day, and they're looking at you like, lady.
Yes.
And so, you're thinking that you're inspiring them with academics, and you're because that's what served you. And then you realize, oh, there's some unhealed stuff here that I have to work out. Yeah, it's a beautiful thing, what you described, though, because when you think of yourself as an educator, what a well-rounded, multifaceted educator you've become. And I think that's so inspiring. Tell me how teaching has strengthened other parts of your life. Julie, let's start with you. I would imagine it's strengthened your ability to be a parent, because I know your daughter is extraordinarily important to you, and you take that parenting, the mothering, very, very seriously. Would you say that it strengthened your parenting and maybe anything else in your life?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think being a teacher and an administrator, a principal, for one, my daughter says she's never going to be a school principal because she gets to hear all the war stories day in and day out. But
Yes.
I think one of the things I think I said when I was preparing for guesting with you, Nicole, was that I was mothering these kids well before I was somebody's biological mother. I've loved my students and called them my kids until I had my own. And they're still my kids, but it is a very different relationship now. But I do think that the conversations I've had with my students over the years, both as a teacher and as a principal, have definitely had an impact on how I relate to my daughter. She and I are very close. And I have seen what the parent relationship has done to students. And so I'm very conscious of the role that I play in her life, particularly now that she is a teenager and will be transitioning to high school.
Oh my God.
It's such a crucial relationship. And I always say, parents, I want to teach, let's do a parenting class and let's talk about being a parent, because I'm one as well. And that's, something I lean on with parents sometimes when they're a little defensive is, hey, I'm a parent too, and I have a teen too. And then you kind of see them relax, okay, she does get it. I've had these conversations with my child. So for sure, it's helped my parenting. I feel like even though I took a very long hiatus from my writing, I recently returned actually during the pandemic, I returned to fiction writing. And the work that I did as an English teacher, and then obviously the stress that I've endured as an administrator, I think has really motivated me to get back into my fiction writing. So that's I think it's helped me there as well. I mean, I think when you're a teacher, you see the world through just so many lenses eventually. I think not at first, Nicole, you're right. I think we kind of see through our own kind of tunnel vision at first, through our own lens of experience. But then as you go on and you get to know your students and their families and their lives and their experiences, your world kind of broadens. And so I think that definitely has helped my writing. I feel like I'm coming into this a lot wiser with a kind of a broader lens to look at the world through.
Lovely. Briana, what about you? How has teaching strengthened other parts of your life?
So I was trying to think about this question, and I'm not entirely sure if what I have here is an answer, but I guess I'll say that teaching keeps me sane. And that's what I really learned during the pandemic, and it's interesting to me. So like I said, I talked about that really awful year I had. And then the next year, I was gifted the most glorious children ever. I had 6th period, BATA freshman, which you would think would be
those 3 things right there put together.
You would think, when I
freshman.
saw that that's what I was going to be teaching, I was like, oh good God, I'm like, this is going to be it. Last year kicked me and punished me, and this year is just going to be. They were glorious. They are probably, I don't know if I can say the best class I've ever had, because I did have one other class, but top 2 best classes I've ever had. They were just so engaged and fun, and did their work, and it was just such a great group of kids. And then the pandemic happened and they were stolen from me, and I was really upset. So I really struggled with the spring, where it was just like I wasn't a teacher at all. Like the spring was a complete joke. I was having Zoom meetings that 5 kids were coming to, and then we would just like chat, and I'd mostly just like check in with them and see if they were doing like nothing curriculum based. Like it was just bad. And then last year was better than that, but it was still like I'm this is not teaching. Like I'm not really building relationships. I did actually, again, I had a 6th period bad freshman class that I did manage to build a couple of relationships with those students. Like they all come and say, I'm really upset none of them ended up in my sophomore class. None of them. I'm like, really? I got none of you? But they come and say hi to me, and like, so I was able to, but that they were very rare. Like they were special. And last year was really hard for me, like really hard, like mentally. And so I don't say it was my worst year of teaching, because it's like I don't count it. It was bad because it wasn't teaching. And I like, this is something I've kind of always known about myself. I've learned it from the summers. Around beginning of August, I'm ready to go back to school. Like I love my time off. Like it's nice to like be lazy. It's nice to be able to travel and things like that. But eventually I'm like, I need my routine back. I need my kids back. I need to be back in the classroom. And so 17 months of not being in the classroom almost killed me. Like, and I say that as barely an exaggeration. It was just, I was like, I have to teach. So it's interesting to me that this all happened. Like if there was ever any doubt about, like, I'm like, no, I have to teach. I have to, like, I need it. And so teaching kind of, I was looking for anything I could find to give me my teaching fix. And I actually ended up, like, over the course of the pandemic, kind of getting into this gaming group. So I have like friends that I've made online who stream video games, and they asked me to be a moderator for their stream. And
fun.
so like I sit there, and mostly I like don't really do much. I'm just chatting and things like that. But if like people like step out of line, I like give them warnings, and I was like, it's teaching. I'm like, and I told my friend who I mod for, I'm like, you're like giving me my teaching fix during this. And so like that was actually something that helped keep me sane, because I was like, it's giving me a little bit of it. And so it's just basically it's strengthened like my ability to know who I am. And I do know eventually I would also like to have children, and I know it'll make me a better parent. Maybe not at first, because I mostly just know teenagers, but I'm gonna be good at I'm gonna be good at parenting a teenager. They're probably gonna confuse me a lot when they're younger, but
no, you know what? Toddlers are just teenagers that don't know how to talk. Right? They're the same. It's the same. Yeah. It's the same. I think you'd be an extraordinary parent, Briana. And you know what I'm hearing you say is that teaching brings you home to yourself. Yes. And it's interesting because, like Monique will say, Monique Coffrin, who we both know, who we're going to have, or we all know, she talks about how the kids give her energy.
Yeah.
You know, that she can come in low, and by the end of the day, she's charged up. Where I had the opposite, we worked across the hall from each other. And I was like her cheerleader in the morning, and she was my cheerleader in the afternoon, because after a day with kids, I'm like, I just need a nap. My introvert self cannot handle any more stimulation. But for you, it feeds your soul. And I think it's like giving you your life in a really beautiful way. Almost. Yeah. Yes, I think that's lovely. So there's this Indigo Girls song called Hammer and a Nail. I don't know if you guys know it, but there's a line in it that says, if you have a care in the world, you have a gift to give. And I think about teaching as a microcosm of our society, and how part of the reasons I believe that our society has broken down is that we've stopped coming to the collective table with our unique gift, that I kind of see as a puzzle piece, right? And we all have to come to this table. We all have to be brave enough to put our puzzle piece down. And only then are we going to see the pieces come together and us start to bind as humans, that we belong to one another. And I see that happening in teaching as well. We're all so tired and so burnt out. It's like the system is designed to break us from being able to show up with our gift. And so one of the intentions of this podcast is to really support people in thinking like, what is my gift? And what am I bringing? Because like you said, Brianna, about the boy that you couldn't reach, we can't get all kids, right? We can't do all things. I'm never going to be like the activities director, even though I was in leadership and all that stuff. Like that doesn't my body is not wired for that kind of a person, you know? So I need to think about my gifts and really lean in and nourish those. So I want people to be thinking about that. And so with that as kind of the backdrop, I'm wondering, Julie, if you can share with us, what's your read on what your gift is? What do you care so much about that it really is your gift in this world?
So I've kind of shared a little bit that I'm in a lot of ways a reluctant principal, and I don't think I'm a reluctant principal because I don't like being a principal. I think it's because truly I feel very much like an introvert, and I'm pretty introspective. And I think that the principal job, like the activities director job, often calls for people to be really out there and extroverted, and that's not in my wiring. But what is in my wiring is the ability to kind of model, both for my students and my staff, the importance of really taking care of yourself, right? And so I think I've been a model of being reflective, of self-care, and this is something like I walk my talk, right? So people are very aware of where I'm at with, my creative pursuits. My life as a mom always takes precedence, so my staff feels very supported. Like they know they can come to me and say, my kid needs to get to the dentist. Is it okay? I know it's last minute. And they know I'm always going to say, of course, right?
Yeah.
Because I take care of my staff the way that I would have taken care of my students. And so I think that that's a really important piece. I think it's a piece that's often lost with principals. I think so many of them, like teachers, are completely burned out. The turnover is crazy, especially now with principals. And I think it's an important thing to teach our students, right? Like we're going to be doing our second annual wellness retreat with our students. That's the way we kick off January now, is we focus on the self, because I don't think you can't attend to the business of going to school, whether it's going to school, teaching school, leading school, if you don't attend to yourself.
Oh my God, that's so true. That's so true. And I've long admired about you, like, no, like with your running, I carve out this time and I run. I carve out this time and I'm attentive to my child. I carve out this time. You're always, and I don't know if it's a little bit like a duck, where it looks like they're chill, but their feet underneath are going crazy. I don't know if that's what that is for you, but something I've always respected about you, Julie, is that you just are so intentional. And whoever is in front of you has your full attention. And I think that's such a beautiful thing as in a leader, especially. We don't have to be the fancy cheerleader leaders, right? We can, like you said, lead by example, right? And lead by having humanity with one another. I remember when I got pregnant, Cheryl Canberra, I was talking with Cheryl Canberra, who was our principal at that point. I don't know how I'm going to be a teacher and be a mother at the same time, blah, blah, blah. And she said, Nicole, you'll go home at 3:15 every day for the next 3 years, and that's okay. And I just thought that changed everything for me. And it sounds like you've got a similar vibe in that way. Maybe it's something about women as leaders. I don't know. There's something to explore there. Brianna, what would you say is your gift that you bring?
So I feel like every teacher that you're going to talk to, because you're pulling from San Lorenzo, and San Lorenzo is so very, very special, is definitely going to talk about like just loving the children. And so I was like, okay, I'm not going to say that because like that's just all of us. My thing is I am disgustingly organized. Like it's my thing. It's what I'm known for. I remember one time I was like unofficially mentoring a teacher who joined us and he and I would talk all the time, and he was in my classroom, and I was like doing some like folders or something like that, and he's like, "You're really organized." I'm like, "Oh, you have no idea." And I had some students in the room at the time, and they weren't listening to our conversation. I turned to talk to them. I'm like, "Hey guys, if you had to say one thing about me that makes me like really different from other teachers, like that you're like, wow, that's just Miss Chris, what would it be?" They're like, "Oh my God, you're so organized." and he started laughing. I'm like, "No, it's me. Like, I just have folders and systems and things like that." So something I try really hard with my students is, I'm like, I know you're not, I'm like, I don't expect you guys to be me. I'm like a little insane. I'm like, but being organized will help you so much. Like, even if you can just get slightly more organized than you were, I'm like, it makes your life so much easier. And so it's something I push a lot in my classrooms, like that I do binder checks, and when we had planners, like I would do planner checks, and I just like I'm constantly kind of pushing them like to try to be a little bit more organized, because it's like when your life is organized, even like when things you can organize, it makes the chaos around you just feel a little bit better. And I know that's not gonna vibe with all students. Like, some students are like, "I don't care," but for other students, I've managed to help get more organized. They're like, "This does feel a lot better." So I think that's kind of like my insane gift that I give it to my students. I know my colleagues appreciate it as well. That they know that they can, count on me to, like, we need the calendar done. And I'm like, okay, I'll have that done. I'm like, let's plan out the rest of the year. Like, and it's also, it's a bad thing because I'm not very flexible, and it's something that I've been working on. So it's like, it's definitely a double-edged sword, but looking on the positive side,
always our greatest gift is always our greatest challenge. I mean, there's always like something like the light and the shadow, right? There's always something like that. I think that's a fantastic, and I love how practical that is, Briana, that you know yourself, like, I'm your girl. You want a calendar? I'm it. And that it gives you joy. Because sometimes we're good at things that don't give us joy, right? And there's something about the magic of being really good at it and really loving it. And that's like the magic sauce. That's really when it's a gift. I love that. Do you all, either of you have a favorite song when you think about getting ready for a great day of teaching that you like to play?
Lovely Day by Bill Withers.
Oh, I love that song.
That's
I love that
great
song. Yes. That's a great song. What about you, Brianna?
I was thinking about it. I don't listen to a lot of music anymore. I mostly listen to audiobooks when I drive. But if I had to, when I do listen to music, I listen to musicals. And I am very basic, so Hamilton is my favorite musical.
Nice. No, that's not basic at all.
But no, totally my shot.
Yes, I love that.
Not technically my favorite song from Hamilton. Burn is, but I would never subject my students to me after listening to Burn.
Oh my God, I know that, and It's Quiet Uptown. Every time that song, I'm like,
okay, guys, we're just gonna cry today.
Okay, so we call this podcast Copy Room Conversations because, in my experience, the best conversations I had at school were in the copy room. And so there's something so fun to me about the morning, like before school, as long as you're not super stressed out, like, I forgot to run this 5-page packet, like, that's the worst. But
that would never happen to me.
No, that would never happen to you. It happened to me a lot. So, we're in the copy room and somebody's punching holes and somebody's running the machine, and, we're all kind of getting ready to go off to our day. That's, to me, that's my favorite part of the day. What would you all say as you exit the copy room, practical or theoretical, light or serious? What would you say to us to help us have a great day? Julie, let's start with you.
I think I would probably tell people to take some time to take a deep breath at some point. That's important to me. I need it. So don't forget to take a deep breath at some point in the day.
God, amen. Brianna?
I would just tell people, just be yourself today. I think that's one of the things that students can smell fake a mile away and they don't like it.
Totally,
they don't like it. And so I tell them I'm a more PG-13 version of me with them. Much less swearing, much less dirty jokes.
Yes, yeah.
But I tell them, because they ask me, their favorite thing is when I call them on their swearing, and they're like, Miss Chris, do you swear? I'm like, never. I never say bad words ever. And then I tell them, like, no, I swear all the time. I just know how to code switch. And I'm like, and that's what I tell them, like, you guys, the me I am with you, it's who I am. I just swear less.
That's lovely. That's lovely. And that's, I'm sure, where the bulk of your success is, Briana, is that your authenticity is palpable. And that's an incredible gift that you bring. Thank you both so much for this hour. I'm so grateful that you came on. It's my very favorite thing to talk to people I love and respect. So thank you for being here. And I just wish you a really, really lovely new year.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Nicole.
Yes. Thank you for sharing your precious time with us. My hope is it gave you some respite from your worries and some time to remember that we belong to one another, and that there's no such thing as other people's children. If you enjoyed the show, please rate, review, and subscribe. These 3 things make a big difference in our ability to connect teachers to one another in service to each other and our kids. We also want to thank Dirt Path Publishing for partnering with us on this podcast. The mission of Dirt Path is to publish work for social good. They are proud to include Copy Room Conversations under that banner. For more information on coaching and editing services, or if you have a book you want to publish that you know will serve the greater good, visit dirtpathpublishing.com.